Hey,
Yeah.
kind of,
That
kind of
worked.
almost a song. Kind of almost
It's
a
getting
song.
better.
Yeah, it was coming from nothing. So I mean,
But hey,
we can
you,
only
you
go up.
didn't
We can
you
only go
didn't
up.
drop any in between.
I didn't. I know my fingers actually hit chords. It was good.
See,
I'm
you
gonna
are
actually take this.
progressing in 10-second increments.
There we go. Yeah, exactly right. Because that's about all I get time to practice. I was thinking today, I have all these contracts due. When am I gonna get time to finish them? And then I thought, oh, ukulele, I should practice. And then neither of them happened, of course, because that's
No.
that's the way life goes. So, welcome, 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 Erica. You are in someplace kind of
I'm
fancy
in
today.
New
What's going on?
York.
Oh, I see, I
Work
see.
week.
It's a work week in New York. Hey, it's Helena Capel. What's going on, Helena? Um, Today we don't have a guest, and we have to explain
Well, you
why.
know what? Kind of for a good reason. The
Yeah, yeah,
reason
yeah.
everybody wants to hear. Your stuff finally shipped and arrived. So imagine, waiting for like your entire print run of like a Kickstarter to be delivered finally showed up.
Right.
So you know
Uh,
what? We know why. We totally understand why she's not here.
yeah. So tonight's guest, Amy Bayo, was supposed to be here to talk about hope and creativity and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, she's stuck unloading pallets of her game
Her
Rabbit
hope
Rabbit
and
right now.
creativity things of her own.
Yeah, which is great for her. She's been like hoping, literally, that her pallets would show up for the last month or so. And anybody out there in board game land knows that it's fraught right now. Shipping is a mixed bag, and you're paying such a premium that you want everything when you want it, and you expect it to get there. And so today it did for her, which means we had to call off her part of the show. But we decided instead to keep running because, as they say, the show must go on. And so it's just me and Erica and y'all. So everybody out there in Maple Syrup Land, welcome to the show. And today we are going to do a couple things. We are going to talk about what we think is going to happen in 2022.
There's
We
shifts
normally,
coming from what we
yeah,
hear.
we normally leave this for the end of the year, but hey, let's talk about it now.
Oh, I want
And
to
you
add
can make
one
predictions
thing that I
too.
have heard kind of like down the grapevine, like from production people,
Okay.
is that shipping costs, at least, not necessarily time, but costs have started coming a little bit down again.
Yeah. So we've been hearing the trend is a downwards, lightly downward.
Well,
Um,
it started. Now, the problem
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
material costs haven't. So you might be able to save on the shipping finally, at least getting it hopefully back down. Though, I mean, after the fees that they managed to get for this amount of time, it's never going back.
Right. So the other thing that's coming out, I think either today or tomorrow, is like the public holdings announcement for some of the biggest shipping companies in the world.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of people waiting to see like just how much they're announcing that they've profited
Oh
from
my
this.
God, the amount of like millionaires and billionaires in the US alone because of like people who made money off of COVID at this point is insanity.
It's so weird. It's such a weird thing. It's like
Everybody else
war
is like,
profiteering,
everyone else
right?
lost their jobs. And hey, look, all the new millionaires who profited off of your misery, people.
Yeah, that's kind of a harsh reality. Like the haves and the have-nots, right? So that's one trend that we're seeing is that there's a downward trend in shipping costs because at the height it was like almost 40,000 for in US for a 40-foot
Yeah, I think the average
container.
was like 25,000 for like a shipping container.
Yeah. So
And it
they're
used to be 3 to 5.
yeah, usually there was people were quoting 32, 35, almost into the
Because you
40s.
could. That's where
Yeah.
it really comes down to. It's a because you could.
Yeah. And so now it's going down into the 24s, 21s, and that's still, 7 times as much as it used to be in
Yeah.
some cases, right? So that's one of the trends. Another trend that is happening, unfortunately, like Erica alluded to, is availability of materials, of like raw materials
So I
to
will
make
say
the
there's an
game.
uptrend after this, but you keep going.
Yeah, right. So just in our case for Avatar Legends, we know that some factories just can't handle the volume, and they don't have the volume of material required to make the number of books we have to print now.
And it's not
So
necessarily available even. That's the
yeah,
yeah.
Marvel and DC Comics had to decide which comics are we going to go to print with next month. Not, hey, when are we printing? It's no, which ones? Which of our line gets to not have an issue next month, a
Mm.
physical issue, right? So there was a period of time where there just wasn't enough paper, and this is all related to shipping, because there's enough paper around the world in some cases. It's not in the right places at the right times.
Well, and
Definitely.
manufacturing changed. So a lot of what a lot of people didn't know is that a lot of factories, because it was far more profitable to make things for, let's say, like, like COVID safety,
Yeah.
right? So there were so many factories that switched what they're producing for 2 years, right? So one thing people don't realize, like, for example, like, people weren't making enough chlorine, and there was actually a chlorine shortage, and that was
Yeah.
like a big problem because also everyone seemed to get a pool over COVID.
Right.
But it's because all these companies were producing something else. So the thing is that production started back up on all this stuff, but it means there's a 2 year lull in a ton of products.
Yeah. So even just locally, I know that some of our breweries started doing hand sanitizer instead because
Yep. So then they're not
it was
making beer. Like,
way more
but it's
profitable.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a trade-off, right? And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of these other products just not being made. So like if you're wondering why the shelves are empty, it's not just shipping because a lot of this stuff is actually made in North America. Like a lot of a lot of these different types of, like, paper products, whatever it is. The thing is that they weren't making them
Yeah, they were switched over to some other line of production,
because
so
it was way more money. Right. So,
yeah.
but here's the fun news, at least for that.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is like we go like the negative positive for a lot of this stuff, right?
Sure.
Um, there is a big push, especially for companies that like produce like higher quantities of stuff, to really, really start focus on sustainability. Because if you don't have access to, let's say, the same papers and plastics, where do you get it? So there is a really, really big increase in, like, if you're going to do wood, you're doing bamboo. If you're going to do plastic, can it be recycled plastic? Like a big push right now is ocean plastics. This gets a little
Yeah.
weird because apparently there's more than one type. So if you're you have to watch out for this when it comes down to like who's saying they're doing this. There's ocean plastics that are apparently within a certain mile radius of like land, right? So they're not
Yeah.
necessarily the bigger problem. They're good to get out of the water. They're easier to get out of the water. And so there's companies that are using that, which is a great step, right? It's a great step
Yeah.
to get it done. I know Hasbro is working in that area where they're doing plastics, and then like that's the range is like it's how far off coast or something like that. Then there's like
Sure.
ocean plastics, which is like,
The stuff that floats around
yeah,
in
going to go to like Garbage
globs.
Island and pulling
Yeah.
that. And now there's more and more products made out of that. And so even game companies are on that higher level are making that switch of how can we kind of like work with these plastics, right? Work with these more sustainable things, work with vegetable inks, work with whatever it is. And it's partly, I'm sure, because the products are not available on the same level. But then there's also that push of, well, how do you be more sustainable? And so there is a push for ocean plastics and things like that right now.
Yeah, and whether or not, you think as a little publisher, you're doing anything with your 1,000 print run by, not using shrink and, using stickers instead
Yeah, look how many
or
people do the
whatever.
clear stickering now
Yeah.
instead of having to wrap the whole thing. And if it's packaged properly, you wouldn't have that problem. Like I know a lot of people, especially if you've got like a high gloss on a box or something like that, they're like really like, oh, but it has to be shrink wrapped. It's like actually all you need is like layers of like a sheet of paper of some kind between them, just so they're not rubbing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's other ways around it if you think of it the shipping side.
Yeah, and, instead of plastic inserts, looking at, recyclable materials used as inserts, like, blown filament paper and things like that. So
Mhm.
there's I think there's gonna be some innovation that comes out of this
The
basically a
scarcity to a
paucity.
degree.
Yeah.
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 Well, and it's also, I think, a positive trend.
Yeah.
It's, and hopefully this trend doesn't go, but it is actually trendy right now to be able to say that you have a sustainable product. It is a call out that you put onto a product, right?
Yes.
To make it sell better. Now, hopefully that trend doesn't go anywhere, because if that becomes something where that's what I'm looking for on a box,
Yep.
hopefully then that increases the what we look at,
Yeah, that
making
becomes an
things better.
industry standard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. What other trends are you, thinking of there, Erica, or have you heard in the wind?
Yeah, so actually, I have to say the biggest interesting one for me right now is hearing the direction that hobby and mass are going, and it's completely opposite.
Of where
So,
it is now, right?
yes, and this is
And
just
of
kind
each
of like
other.
knowing what, feedback's been coming back from people pitching to publishers, at the last few cons. Um, and I would love if anybody went to Essen and had some of these experiences, because I wasn't there. So a lot of this is more like, me following up with people and getting, but technically still secondhand. How the last 3 to 4 years, I want to say, there's been a huge push in hobby for that entry gateway. Like, what's that one step above mass, or that thing that could maybe get me into mass, right? And I think we've seen that so much with like a lot of the successful hobby games over the last few years. Like, look at like a lot of the ones that are getting the most notoriety, or recognition for awards, or whatever it is. So what do you think everybody's been working on while they're at home because of COVID? Is that level and weight of game? Well, I'm hearing from the especially the German publishers, but the European publishers, is, what's your heaviest, crunchiest game to show? Like, when was the last time you heard that?
The 1980s.
But that's
No,
what,
I'm
do you know
kidding.
what I mean? Like, what a shift. I'm like, I'm predicting, give it like 3 years, there's gonna be a whole new wave of like Euro board games, where it's gonna, you remember when early 2000s, when all the Euro board games started coming over, and they were a little heavier and they were crunchier, and they had all the bits and the bops, and it's like
Yeah.
basically like, worker placement plus this, plus this, plus, you know what I mean? I think we're going back.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because if you look at those games, they actually were only they were really only complex for the time. They weren't actually super, super complex, 'cause a lot
Well,
of them
not
just had
now.
1 or 2 core mechanics.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, yeah. But they
But it
took a
was a
long
lot
time
to
to
be introduced to
play.
when you had nothing to
Yes.
get you there. Like, we
Yeah.
didn't have gateway games to get us to the
Not really,
Euros when they
no.
came over,
Yeah.
right?
And I think it was more a question of, time and like depth that was different. And now we had, the last couple years of, hey, let's get more people into games. And now that those people are into games, especially after the pandemic, where board games, didn't actually suffer tons and tons in terms of uptake in new customers.
Most companies went up. If you had
Yeah.
product, like, this is the problem
Yes,
though.
that's the thing,
If
right?
you had product, it sold, because there was a lot of people that got into gaming, puzzles, whatever it was,
Because of
um,
the pandemic.
because
Yeah.
of the pandemic. And I mean, there was crazy crap, like crazy old crap, getting pulled out of like God knows what nook and cranny of storage and being sold out.
Yes, which is interesting. I mean, I think this Christmas we're gonna see that if you have product and if it can be on shelves, it'll probably sell. So that just means did you get it to where it needs to go,
Yeah.
which is
This was
again a
assuming
shipping
you had it
issue.
though. Like,
Yeah.
there was people
Yeah.
who were sitting on product in warehouses cleaned out.
Yep.
But if you didn't
Oh,
have the
100%.
product, like, what were you
Yeah.
gonna do?
Well, I mean, we sold through most of our stuff for like mind management really quick because it's just like, oh, it's gone. Oh, okay, good.
And yeah.
Because people are looking like what can I put on my shelves? People are starting to come back to my store. What is there to put on my shelves, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and I think we're gonna have that cyclical pushback all the time between crunchy and gateway and hobby. As the it's almost I could probably do a longitudinal cohort study on it to figure out what the cycle
Well,
of
so most
how
trends
long
are
does it take it?
15 to
Yeah,
20-year cycles. So meaning, if it was popular roughly 15 to 20 years ago, there's a good chance it's going to be resurrected in sometimes the same form, sometimes a slightly new form. But
yeah,
that's the at least the trend cycle of most larger things that lasted a few years, right? It's why we
yeah.
see clothing like clothing almost is like exactly on a 20-year cycle. of like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like whatever it, if it's it's like the 50s, 70s, 90s, and 2010s will be like all the same thing, right? And
Yeah.
that's we're starting to
Or
see that,
or the same an evolution of the same,
for
like, bell bottoms and different types of bell
yeah,
bottoms.
and like we're seeing that now where it's like we've absolutely hit the late 90s, which is like right on trend.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the age of the majority or the people who are the consumers that we're looking at, you
Right.
know.
35 plus becomes the buying power
Yeah,
of like, and
yeah,
that becomes like what was popular when you were in high
yeah,
school kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
But it
So,
really is on these
reboots of
cycles.
Voltron and reboots of He-Man, right? And that kinda thing,
How
right?
many reboots? Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think our cycles actually not shorter, but sort of in halves, because we have inexperienced gamers who become experienced gamers, and so their taste shifts
What's the next
as
thing?
yeah, what's the next thing for them? And so we might actually have a 10-year or a 7.5-year cycle, where we see, okay, gateway, 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 because we need to bring new people in. Okay, they're in. Now we need to have product to sell to them. And it's new product, right? So because it's not quite the same as a lot of so gaming is different, right? Because a lot of games go out of print. you know,
Yeah,
we-
unless you can afford or know that you have the kind of like the clientele for like refreshes, which I mean, we're
yes.
seeing a ton of that right now too.
Yeah, which is good. So evergreen games, great. However, not every game is an evergreen, even really popular ones
Yeah,
or critically acclaimed ones. The only ones that are evergreen are really the ones that sell a
no matter
lot, no
what.
matter how good they are, right? So will the next generation be able to get Pandemic? Of course they will. But will they be able to get Mage Knight? Maybe not, right?
Mhm.
So that's the type of thing we're talking about in terms of cyclical nature of the game industry. So there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, what's next for me?" And they go search on BGG and they say, "Oh, that game doesn't exist. I want a game like that." Because you
What's
can't
the
buy it
new
anymore.
version of
Right.
that?
Or so yeah, they go search for it and then they clamor for this thing. And so the companies are going, well, I guess we need more crunchy games, which we do,
But
because we
funny
have gone
enough,
through a
the trend
paucity
is
effect.
crunchy, but shorter. And so I'm
Yes.
really curious what this is going to start to look like because I actually think this is an interesting space to be in. Because usually you think crunchy, you think, oh, it's going to be like 2 hours. Well,
Right.
imagine being asked by a publisher, I want crunchy, but I want to
In
be
an
like
hour.
30 to 45 minutes. That's
Wow.
an ask right now.
Yeah. That's
So
that's
I'm
a hard
super
ask.
curious to see what's going to come out of that.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. So, let's just go back to the text first. People are saying, hey to Helena and Price and Zach. Good to see you, Shem. Shem is gonna tell us a little bit about what his manufacturer has. And Helena just said she just paid 50K for 2 containers. Yeah,
Oh, it's gonna
so
hurt so much too when we get like a couple years out and things. I mean, then I don't think they're ever gonna go back to normal, but like at least I think they'll go back down because it will get competitive again, right?
yeah,
Like what they'll do is once one person starts to undercut, then the trend will go down. But there's no
yeah,
incentive to do that yet. I
no,
think it's coming, but I don't think it's like right around the corner,
right,
right? But then when it
yeah,
does, you're like, I paid that much, like
yes. And then you have to amortize that across your games,
yeah.
otherwise, what are you
And that
doing?
was guaranteed not part of the original plan for
Yeah,
like anybody who was in shipping mode by that point. You
right,
already had your like per unit cost figured out.
yeah. And so the question then is, do we keep game prices at a high level? If we do, then shipping will never go down, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's such an interesting conundrum, and it's chicken and eggy. Shem says he's missed us because he hasn't been here for the past few weeks. Good to see you too, Shem. But let's talk about what Shem has told us. Well, Zach asked a question. Zach said, "Could punchboard waste be recycled for new chipboard raw materials?" I mean, of course it could. It's just a question of will it be right, and is there a very specific thing that you have to do that? I don't know. Like, are we gonna have green? Oh, in Canada, in some cities like Guelph, it's like wets, dries, and you take your compost and you're recycling out in different ways. But are we gonna have a punch board? Just a recycling bin
Yeah,
for
but remember
punch
there's a
board?
ton of places that don't even recycle. like even
Also
across
true.
the US,
Yeah, and,
right? So
even in Canada, right?
uh,
And there's different types of recycling, like, if you contaminate your recycling, it's like the load is just
it's going to
gone,
garbage anyway.
right? Shem says, Bagasse paper, I don't even know what that is, bagasse paper, is a premium black core cardstock made of 100% sustainable materials. Alright, let's look into that, that sounds awesome.
Mhm.
Because you get a lot of times, people, "Oh, you know what, that'd be a big trade-off. If I went recyclable, it's gonna be worse quality. I don't want the
Well,
feel as
it's
such."
not worse quality. Unfortunately, it actually is a higher price.
Yeah, that may be true too. Supply, demand,
Yeah,
and the
because there's amazing
remanufacture of recycled,
well,
right?
there's amazing, like, recycled materials out there, and they're just as strong, if not sometimes better, but you're gonna pay a premium for a lot of them.
Until they become maybe the normal
Until
ask, right?
until
So,
they
we'll see.
become like, yeah, maybe the demand is higher, or we start, "Hey, let's start harvesting all that plastic out of the ocean." That sounds amazing.
Let's do that first, right? Um, Shem said that his manufacturer is switching to a sustainable material for cards and soon rule books. And he has a brief list. So Shem, can you tell us which manufacturer this is later too as well?
So he
Um,
had to run off to a play
oh,
test, but if
he
he
had to
could
head
post
off.
in, maybe we'll reach out to him later and ask him to post in Shop Talk, because these are good to know, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like what are it's good to, okay, first off, it's important to know what's out there, because then you know to look for it, right? And you can
Yes.
start watching prices, and you can watch who's making it and things like that. So it's really, I think it's really good, guys, if you know anything, or even a specific, source or manufacturer, it's like they do this. I
Hmm.
think that's still valid information to share if you can, just because there are people who are willing to pay that little bit more to be able to say, I
Right.
am sustainable, it's recycled, it's whatever it is, because
Yeah.
as we talked about like a few minutes ago, it's a selling feature.
Yeah, Tim Eisner just did a game, one of his, latest Canopy, and it was done with as much, care for the environment as he could do with a specific manufacturer, and it's really nice, like, to
Mhm.
see, and it's getting a really good reaction from players. The players that care, and the players that don't probably wouldn't care,
No,
and
as long as
they'll
they're
just
cool with
buy it
the
anyway.
price, it makes no
Yeah,
difference to them anyway.
yeah. So we'll get that information from Shem.
Mhm.
Um, Good luck. Excited about the current Kickstarter for Shem's new stuff, I guess he's talking about, which is cool. Crunchy but short is my jam, says Adam Young. Quick setup time, I think, is a big one. People want to get things to the table. Yeah.
So that is a big one. I will say that is heavily influencing mass right now, is how fast can I set this up and get into it? And there's some interesting trends there we can get into after. But yeah, I think part of this ability to have this 30 to 45-minute crunchy game is not to have like 1,000 bits of maintenance. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can't make
that's a
something
really good point.
45 minutes if there's like 5 minutes of maintenance between every single turn.
Yeah, or even every round, right? Then you
Yeah.
got like, what do you mean? I got a 3 round
What does a
game.
round look like? Yeah.
Yeah. Adam asks, has the need for two-player capable game be stressed by publishers like they had for solo modes during the pandemic? Uh, my biases may be getting in my way here, but we stopped buying anything that was not good at two early 2020 because of world events. I think solo is probably getting the bigger push because there weren't as many of them,
I think
right?
it's shifting again, though. In all
Yeah, sure.
honesty, I think publishers aren't, at least from what I'm hearing, they're not looking for 1 and 2 player games anymore. Like, it's nice if it's there and it's functional, but it's not an active search that it was like previously.
That's interesting because, I hang out in some solo gaming forums and solo
But
gamers are
you're
like, "Yeah,
biased because the entire
it's here to
group is all
stay."
solo gamers
Oh, no, I mean, no, 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 I'm not talking about demand. I'm saying they're happy
that it
that
exists.
it exists, and they're like, "It's here to stay because of pandemic, and we're so glad." So, I mean, I don't think publishers
It's
are
here
gonna
to
say
stay.
no to those things,
I think
but
if it's available, okay. I think if it's available for your game and it's actually functional, like not just something you threw, you threw it because someone asked you, or like, as we know, there's a lot of Kickstarters that all of a sudden, like someone's like, we should have a 2-player mode. And they're like, now includes a 2-player mode. And you're like, but did you test that?
Yeah.
We've seen enough of those, right? Like a
Right.
legit 2-player game with the right theme can catch on, but it will always have a limited audience, and that limited audience isn't as stuck at home right now. It's starting to change again, right? So I mean, it's not that all of a sudden we're going to see like everybody's like a giant group party game or anything like that, but I think we're going to see a lot of theme shifts. And what we can talk about that too is like there's
Yeah.
definitely tonal shifts in what people are looking
Yes.
for in games right
Yeah.
now. But yeah, I just know that it's kind of turned into a bit of a hard sell unless it's doing something totally different, or it's like a revolutionary theme or something. There doesn't seem to be a lot of demand for 1 and 2-player anymore.
Interesting. And Ian Brocklebank put up a link for
The
Bagasse,
Bagasse or whatever it is,
or
Bagasse.
however it's pronounced. I'm gonna look
Bagasse.
that up. Yeah. Um, and then Nicholas Yu says, 2-player games will always have a place in competitive gaming too. I like I used two twice there, Nicholas. I see you.
As
I
I
see what
said,
you're
yeah,
doing.
if it's just well done, like,
Yeah.
is something like, let's say patchwork, is it going to disappear? I don't think so, because I think people enjoy it's got an interesting theme, right? You're
Yeah.
like, you're building a quilt, sure, why not? All right. And then you've got but yeah, I don't know. There has to be something special, I think, right now. But I mean,
Yeah.
to Adam's point that he just put up, it is surprising that more games aren't tuned for 2. But in all honesty, there's a lot of games that don't work at 2. It depends on the interaction.
There's also a lot of games that only work at 2.
That's true too.
And
And
then
again, if it's interesting enough, I think it still has a place. But I do think it's going to be a hard
yeah.
sell.
Yeah, Adam says that his favorites, of course, are those really versatile games that are capable of going up to 4 or 5, but are also good at 2.
Yeah.
And those are hard to find because a lot of times they need some scaling issue. There's some rescaling at the higher
Yeah.
numbers,
Not all
or they
games
need a
work on a direct back
yeah,
and forth like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh, what about Mass? What do you think is gonna happen for with Mass
So
at the
mass
end?
has gotten interesting. It's almost not okay. Gotten lighter is not the right word, because there's a lot of research right now that is saying, because the main buyers out there in games are millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah,
And so they're willing to spend money on games, and they like niche and quirky and things like that. So it doesn't have to be, super accessible to everybody. People are okay to have these like funny, weird, or even super niche genre games. But and they don't mind a little bit of complexity on the back end. Like, complexity can build, but they don't want to see it up front. They want to be able to
interesting.
like put the thing in front of them, be told a
Yeah, I
couple
want it
of
all in the
rules,
box.
let's go. But then,
Start doing it.
yeah, as I'm playing it, I can discover the levels
Right.
and what's
So that sense
happening
of
in it,
discovery is interesting.
right? And that is
Mhm.
absolutely okay. Like, trends are showing that right now. They have no problem with that. They like it to discover that, there's things that are coming out the more they play, but they want to play it in like 15 to 20 minutes and then play again and play again
Yeah.
and discover these things in it. So it's just as interesting as the Crunchy 45 is, what is that almost clever
Sounds like our new company, Erica.
Crunchy 45.
Hi, I'm Senen, this is Erica. We're the Crunchy 45.
Crunchy 45. Um, and I think that's going to be a relief. I do think that's a fun trend. I think I'll be excited. But Mass is really interesting. I think we're going to see, honestly, the death of generic, because it has no place on the shelf anymore. I worry about abstract a little bit, actually, in both genre, like both, whatever you want, fields.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Both sides of
Because
that
even
mass and hobby
Mass is a
fence.
huge, even hobby is a huge push to like very much on like theme
Theme it.
and like
Theme it.
license and niche and whatever. I worry what that would mean for abstract.
You know, I think there'll always be a home for pure abstract amongst like the mathematical and the the people who
But
like
wouldn't that make your
high
print runs,
elegance.
like, super small?
I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what it
Uh,
does. And and the other thing is that a lot of that stuff isn't print heavy. It might be component heavy though, because some abstracts
I
require
just
some
don't know
pretty
how well
interesting
they're
stuff.
going
So
to be received or sell.
yeah,
Because
right.
right now, like, at least especially in mass, you no one's gonna look at something generic.
No.
It needs to have that, what's that quirky twist? What's the thing, right? That makes it different than everything
Yeah.
else on the shelf.
Yeah, it's we've almost created a market space that looks for that stuff, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
But I will
Nicholas,
say
you
another trend that kind of is coming out of both right now.
yeah?
I mean, I find it really strange because in some ways it feels like publishers have more time because they've limited the number of games going out.
Yes,
But
which
I
is
will
good,
say
thank
that
you.
I've noticed publishers working on games less. And I don't necessarily mean that they're not deving it or whatever it is. I mean that when you come up to them, they almost want to already see not only the game done, but you've already come up with that catchy niche theme on your own.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's a thing that they like to see. They wanna
That's
know that you
growing
have
a lot
vision
though, because I think there
vision for
needs to
your
be.
game.
Well, like, wouldn't you say that, like, at least I think people had a bit more imagination to be like, "Oh, I see this as this, or this." You know what I mean? And the level we used to say, like, advice maybe 5 years ago would be like, "Don't overly theme your game because if they don't like the
Yeah.
theme, blah blah blah." In all honesty, if you don't have a strong theme, I don't know how well it's going to be received even in a pitch.
Well, yeah, I think part of it has to do with the current state of affairs where they're so embroiled in logistics and getting stuff from place to place and paying out the nose for it that maybe they don't have the time and the bandwidth to actually do that creative work, right? That might be part of it. The other part is that
Mhm.
they want to see a clear they want to have a clear sense of what is this going to look like to an end customer?
Well,
And the
they want
more
you to
you
do the
can
brand
provide
work
that,
for them is
yeah.
ultimately what this
Yeah.
comes down to.
Which is fine in a way, except that maybe game
Nah.
designers aren't the
My
best
push for
at that.
advertising. I think that
I
honestly, I
know,
think
yeah.
way too many publishers completely don't put the effort, time, or money into properly promoting themselves, building their networks, whatever it is,
Oh, yeah,
right?
100%.
And this is just another extension of that. Is if you're not
Yeah.
even willing to say, like, you should, as a publisher, you should know your buyers pretty well. That you're like, I know that I want to put this out there in front of them. And especially if I'm producing less games, right? Usually for
Yeah.
financial reasons. And I didn't necessarily get rid of staff. So why does the game have to be even more complete and finished and technically already branded for you if all that other stuff is also true?
Yeah, I don't know.
This is what I'm saying. I find it a weird one because I'm actually seeing it in mass and hobby.
Yes, for sure. For sure, for sure, for sure. Let me tell you a quick story about hobby that happened to us.
Mhm.
When people are talking about solo and stuff like that, we got an ask to make a solo game, and then within like the 2 or 3 months that we were working on it, they said, "Oh, wait, 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 no, we've looked at our crystal ball and we've seen the future. We need to make it for more than just one player." It's like, okay, we can do that, but that wasn't the initial ask, so
They were trying to
we
jump
we
on
got
a
to go.
trend, but the
Yeah,
trend was
for
too
sure.
late.
Yeah, for sure, right? And that's the thing when you try to follow a trend, which is I mean, when we talk about trends for 2022, um, in the end, if you try super hard to follow it or catch it, maybe you're trying too hard. Maybe this is what my kids mean by being a tryhard. Because you might actually miss it by the time you're there. Like, you should already be on this
I
type of
think it
thing,
depends how you
maybe. I don't
position
know, but
yourself because
yeah,
ultimately that's exactly what Exploding Kittens is based on. They jump on trends, right? Or well-known games. And I'm almost positive I know another one coming right now, which is a TikTok trend that they just turned into their version.
yeah,
Games you can already buy right now or games you can already play. But what they do is they have their own quirky, way of
yeah,
branding it. And
yeah.
so people almost like that's that's what they want out of it.
That is a very, very different ask, right? Than and
But I
and
don't think
and
most
they
people could pull that off. Like they've almost
no,
started positioning. Like when their position to coming out was essentially that because even the art is based off again a
yeah,
trending artist,
yeah,
right?
for
So
sure.
But it's interesting because I don't think most people can pull the trend. And I think they're probably the rare example of the ones who can, but I think that their customers allow it.
That too. That true. That's true. That's true too. That's what I wanted to say. Nicholas, you got my tongue tied up. Nicholas said the popularity of Azul really surprised him. He didn't expect an abstract game to catch on like that.
I think the appearance of that was a big part of it. The tactile pieces. I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of people who, especially like, maybe intro gamers who didn't actually fully understand the game. I still think it would hit really big for people. Like personally, I think one of the appeals of Azul, besides the appearance, is, and we talked about this, where you get to blame the game for you being mean, right? I literally call it the Azul effect because that
Yeah.
game, I can count out exactly who screwed something. Like within the last 5 turns of Azul, every time you can figure out exactly who screwed who's going to get stuck with what. You know exactly what you're doing, but you can still pretend it's the game. But it's not the game, it's you, right? But I think
Right.
when you can be
The
mean in the
game made me
game,
do it.
but blame the game, there's an appeal to that for people because they don't want to be seen as mean gamers. So I can say,
No.
"Oh, but I
I'm a
had to."
I'm a kind-hearted gamer.
Right? No, but
Let's play
that's
Brew.
a thing. Like, that's a real thing.
Yeah, Nicholas says hate drafting is a fact of life with
It
Azul.
is,
Yeah, it's a game that you can't win if you don't. If you're
right?
playing with other people who are
It's
competitive.
but you can be like, "Oh, but, like, I didn't really have a choice," and, like,
Oh, I don't.
so I call it
It's the
blaming the
only
game.
tile that fit with my hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I call it blaming the game, but I really do like I really start when I started noticing it, I totally call it the Azul effect because I think that was a big part of the appeal of the game, besides being
That
like,
people like that
it's
about it,
so
right?
pretty and tactile. But then I was like, the gameplay is like Mikala. But then it was like, oh, you can be nasty and not actually have to like feel like you are the one being nasty.
Yeah, you're not calling people out and you're not targeting people specifically,
But you
but
kind of are.
yeah, kinda.
Oh, you know
All
you'd
right.
be screwed in those last few rounds, even if you pretend you didn't.
Well, and that's because of the nature of, well, everything's face up. Like it's there's not a lot that you can't see on the board, right?
Hmm.
Any other trends that you want to talk about before we go to the
Oh,
AUA?
I think this one's a positive one.
Cool.
So I've definitely noticed and it's funny because this is actually why we were gonna have Amy come on, right? It's this idea of what is the positive way of doing that, right? And so I don't think that necessarily means there's gonna just be a ton more co-ops, though I do think there's more co-ops coming. It's the intent behind the game. Would a game like Azul, where it actually is kind of nasty, would that do as well, let's say in the next couple of years? I actually don't know. And I kind of don't think so. I think there's very much going to be, and I think we're going to start noticing a tonal difference in games where people want to be more positive. They want to be more lighthearted. I mean, we've been dragged down for how long, right? I don't need more of that. I don't need more misery in my games. I don't need to live more, more awful things. And so, I mean, ultimately, games are an escape, but there's not a lot of games right now that you can point to and say, that's a really calming, nice experience. I got a great sense out of that. I felt really good about myself playing. Like, how often do you hear that after a game? But I do think
No,
it's something
you're
that's gonna change.
totally right. Well, so like video games have been doing that for a long time, in terms of like what cozy gaming is. And Roberta Taylor, Creature Comforts that Helena put out
I think
or is
that's a
putting out.
great example, and also I think that's why it did a really good job, is that's like, I feel good.
Yeah, not mean, not like Azul.
I don't know how well Mean's going to do unless I mean like unless it's branded exactly the right way and you know what you're getting into. I don't know how well Mean's gonna do right now.
Yeah, yeah. Helena calls out her own game. Awesome,
I think
which
that's
I
a
already
great
called out.
example,
So,
and I
yeah,
really do
it's a
think
perfect
there's going
example.
to be more, but I actually think people are actively looking for it because having listened to like more and more pitches, it's really interesting how much it's like, oh, but that just seems like not Mean doesn't seem fun right now.
Well, it's funny. I was just listening to a podcast about this type of idea where when we are, and you can see these trends actually in literature and movies and all
The
that kind of
80s
stuff.
is a great example about what you're going to talk about. Go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That when you are at the height of happiness, people like theater goers want tragedy.
They want
And when you
drama and things like
yeah,
that, yeah.
yeah. And when you are in a bad time, like, pandemic-y times, you want you want to escape that with positivity. Not
So that
toxic
yeah,
positivity, just like you want to feel good and comfortable and
well,
cozy.
yeah, it comes I think there's 2 genres that come out of it, and that's why we tend to see the positive comedy starts to come out, right? People really do want more positivity. It's also tends to be the height of science fiction, fantasy, and horror because they're the ultimate escapes in a lot of things. So usually when society's kind of at its worst,
Yeah.
science fiction, fantasy, and horror start to go at their best. I know that sounds really weird, but go back and look when some of the biggest things have hit and look at what the culture, like what the culture was happening around it,
Yeah.
right? It's a
Yeah.
very and I think escapism is a big part, but it might also be people are outlitting through these mediums more easily because it doesn't have to be real,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and we get reflected upon like our that whole does art reflect life or does life reflect art? And in a lot of ways, it's you'll see the after effects of, this whole panini in a couple years when the work that comes out from people
Start
on
coming
the
in.
aftermath comes out and it's like, okay, now I know we know that everybody lived through this thing, right? And before it was very different because there hasn't been really like a global event of this scale in my lifetime ever.
Wow.
911 was huge, but it wasn't like I wasn't personally super affected by it
The difference is
because
we were
I'm
all
not in New York, right?
spectators of New York at that point, right?
Yeah.
Where this is like, no, this was like literally your neighbor around the world.
Yeah. And we're all such more globally connected too, right? So
Mhm.
it's going to be an interesting thing. But yeah, I think you're right in that trend that I think people want perhaps some sense of safety, security, comfort from the things they find comfort in, which is games. That doesn't mean that every game is going to be a cozy game. Of course,
No,
there's still
there's
going to be
always
other
gonna be
things.
exceptions where if
Yeah,
something's just good, it's just good. But is that what the person is gonna be actively seeking unless they heard the game was good?
yeah,
That's where I
yeah.
think it gets interesting, right?
Adam says when GB Howell was on your show, he said something that stuck with me about making players feel clever. And I think that's a more interesting pivot focus than competitive,
Mhm.
even when co-op is not an option. Maybe even more so if it didn't take a lot of cognitive load to achieve that feeling. Yeah.
People wanna feel
So
clever in a game, or at
yeah,
least have clever moments because it's a weird line with walking with clever because then is it there's some people who wanna be like, "Every turn, if I did this exactly right," you know what I mean? Like, "I'm gonna be ahead," whereas other people are like, "Well, can I explore the game more?"
yeah. Um, There is I'll have to figure out where I heard it. I was on a bunch of panels over the last little while for Big Bad Con and Metatopia and things. But somebody said something really interesting that it's like, "Oh, yeah, I know that, but I should write it down." And obviously, forgot to write it down. But it was like, there are 3 things that people want in games, and if you can find a way to give them those 3 things, you've probably got a good game on your hand. And one of them was definitely feeling competitive, feeling clever.
Mhm.
But the problem is that if you focus on any one of those things, you also then make somebody feel the opposite of that thing, right? By making somebody feel really clever, that's all you're focusing on. You'll
Does
make
someone else
somebody
feel like they're too
feel
dumb for the game?
yes. And so when you make a game that kind of has all 3 of the things that this person was talking about specifically, that if I'm not feeling clever, I can actually go find my satisfaction in maybe collecting sets or whatever the other 3 or 2 other things
Think
were.
you're talking about, like, different forms of emotional investment. Like, where do
Sure.
I see myself almost in the game? And if there's only
Yeah,
one
and play
path to
style.
victory, that's not gonna work for a lot of people unless you're that hyper competitive, just have to beat everybody because you wanna be smarter than them.
Yeah,
But we know those players, do you know what I mean? And we know what type
yeah,
of games they like, but they're not ever gonna have this larger mass appeal, and they're also not the games you're like, "Hey, I feel like, playing something just fun with my friends." Those aren't the
nope.
games you're playing. You know what I mean? That's the,
Yeah,
like, I wanna, like, cream somebody at something kinda game.
yeah. And even if you have multiple paths to victory within your game, but your game only focuses on being, say, I don't know, clever
Mhm.
or being cozy and comfortable, you are ostracizing perhaps some of the market. That's all we're
Especially if it has
saying.
to be optimum play every time. And don't get me wrong, there are those gamers, but I actually think they're like very much the minority, even if they're most vocal. It's like,
Oh, yeah, 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 100%.
uh,
You realize very soon that as a game designer, because that's my type of game is optimization, that you are not the majority,
there's
right?
fun ways of doing it, and there is a satisfaction when you're like you figure that game out. But
Yep.
in no way there are those ever like those light games you can't just wait to get into, or that game you're those are very you're consciously choosing to play this kind of game.
That kinda
You
game,
know?
that optimization engine game, right? Um, so, hey, let's talk about this, which is whatever everybody else wants to talk about. Ask us anything, because 'cause we've got about 15 minutes left, and I figure, with the people who are here, there's only about probably 15 minutes worth of questions and answers. So, we will field your questions. You can ask Erica anything, and you can ask me anything,
As long as we're
and we
allowed
will
to
answer those
answer.
questions. Yeah, as long as we're allowed. So, NDAs aside, we will answer your questions. Like, why, yes, I do have a Kickstarter on right now
Nice.
called Exquisite Crime. It's a role playing game.
Nice.
If you want to go check it out, please do. But no,
I
that
do
was a joke.
not have a Kickstarter right now.
So yeah, ask in the chat. Let us know. And while you're formulating some questions for us, if you have any, we'll just babble on. So oh, interesting. I just got email from one of my fellow faculty members. I'm reading it because it just flashed across here.
You're like, is it
It's
important? Yeah.
Well, it's basically midterms just got posted like a week ago, so we've been meeting with students, and there's been a lot of drop and add. Just a lot of drop and add. So
Oh
it's like this
man.
person is dropping out of the course. That's all I saw flashing by my screen. Um, so yeah, the I think there's some interesting stuff coming out in terms of like what the world will look like after we're allowed to be in public or what is that going to look like, and what are the games that people are going to play when they can play? Are they going to want to play solo? Are they going to want to play two player? Are they going to want to play big mass um, party games? What do you think they're going to want to play?
Well, it's funny. I'd love to know more in like market research, especially from the hobby side. But again, there's not a lot of hobby publishers that do a lot of market research. And again, that's a scale thing to a degree, but it'd be really nice to collect more data from that side. I don't see a lot of data.
Yeah,
I will
that would be a
say,
really actually interesting adjunct company.
yeah,
Go ahead.
well, I will say one of the things that I have kind of been seeing, at least from like some of the market research that we're looking at, is that that millennial Gen Z as being like the main buyers of games right now, they do game like a few times a week. Like that's pretty consistent. Like if you say that like you play games like literally 2 to 3 times a week, that's a lot. The thing is that if you're gaming that often, they want often it just seems like it's like, what's that thing I can like grab and play? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But there is definitely, at least it looks like there's, pretty decent trends that it's like they're pretty avid gamers. The question is, what are they playing? And I think they can be introduced to a lot and they're willing to try a bunch of different things, right? But
Mhm.
it's not like intimidation per se. It's like, don't waste my time. I just want to play.
Yeah. Which is fair enough, right? And again, it's they are perhaps a culture that grew up differently than, I grew up in the 70s and 80s where, reading a rule book was normal.
Mhm,
And video games were not necessarily the norm, right? They were at the tail end of my childhood, right?
mhm.
Whereas people who are growing up in, Gen Z and millennials, they've never not had
Do you know
video
that I got
games.
reclassified as a millennial? Did I tell you that? I've been
What?
reclassified 3 times in my life because I'm early 80s. I am now
Uh,
officially a millennial.
I don't know.
I
I
was
don't
like,
necessarily buy that, but
sure.
okay, sure. But yeah, so in the Western Hemisphere anyway, have never been without the presence of video games
No, that's true.
somewhere in
Like
that life,
it
right?
started with whatever particular system. Like, I mean, I think that's why it's like, being at the beginning of the 80s personally. Like, do I remember not having internet? Yeah. But then again,
But
like, do we literally grow up like always having a gaming system? Yeah.
also,
Do we
yes.
still always grow up actually having a computer even before like internet? Yeah. Did internet hit and then that's like everybody had? Yeah. Did phones disappear really quickly because of it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of stuff to that that might be shaping the cultural ethos of the different generations.
Mhm.
And obviously, like Erica's saying, like she's on the cusp of several things, right? So
I have literally been reclassified, I think, 3 times in my lifetime.
so who knows, right? Uh, I would generally think about, do you fit within a certain age bracket, less about the years and the age and more based on experiences, like shared experiences. That's really what those
Mhm.
cohorts are kind of about. I've used the word cohorts twice today in this one episode. I use it a lot in class. That's
Well,
a
it's a
word that I use
very
all the time.
academic term.
Cohorts.
It is. It's a very
It is.
academic term.
So hey, there's no questions. Nobody wants to ask us anything. I feel sad, and
Mm,
that's okay
they're either
because
not there or we're
nobody
just chattering and they're enjoying
Nobody
whatever we're saying.
nobody planned to have any questions, which is also a thing. Um, oh, here's another thing. Many of us, also got bored of Commodore Atari in fewer hours than what we have today because they were simple.
And repetitive.
Um, it's interesting to think about. Yes. And that's the other thing. Like the games way back in the day were definitely not as
They didn't have the
novel.
space. Like, they
That well,
just
yeah,
did not have the space, and people actually had to get really clever on how to use the space that you had. Like, a lot of people don't know this, but the reason why a lot of video games were as expensive as they were is because they actually had to have the additional processor chip in the actual cartridge because the main system couldn't handle it,
yeah.
right?
It
So
couldn't
it's like
push out the
buying
game in the
little
way that you
computer
wanted it.
discs, if you really wanna think about it. It's like mini little computers that you're putting in, but we don't to think about that. But the systems were so limited, right? They
Yeah,
had to like get really creative and start building the additional pieces into the games themselves.
yeah. And then it's interesting. There's a rebirth in like lo-fi, like 8-bit computer type programming. Like, what if we programmed like it was an 8-bit computer? What games could you make? And there are some brilliant games out there because of the severe limitations of those systems. Like any of the Infocon games about like that are just text-based adventures are wonderful and brilliant because you couldn't do all these other things.
So you had to make
And
it
there's
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's other games that once, oh, polygon count goes up, it's like, all right, this game isn't interesting. It looks good, but it's not an interesting game. So there's those pros and cons, right? And I mean, obviously, in our realm, papercraft is still a limiter, or plastic if you have plastic in it. See plastic. Um, it is these constraints will help you actually design better, I think.
Be more
Help you make
creative, but
yeah,
even we know within the design community, like how many people have their own 3D printers now,
it's a thing. It's a
right?
thing. Yep. I do worry about the sustainability of that kind of stuff, but,
I don't
talking
know.
with talking with, Julio a little bit about it last week, so maybe there is some more ways to be sustainable, and use 3D printing in prototyping, so
Though I will say I found out that there's glow in the dark filament, and that made me really excited.
I'm a happy person because
You
there's
can
glow in the
print
dark.
all your own glow in the dark pieces.
That is kinda cool. That is
There
kinda
really is
cool.
glow in the dark filament. I was very, very like I was like, that's neat.
So there's no questions from anybody? Really, Adam? You don't have a question? You always have
He's
questions.
commenting, not questioning.
Commenting and or there comments that we can bounce off of? Anybody out there? That's totally fine. We would gladly talk about the things that you want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? So we will have Amy on, I think, in 2 weeks. We did have a slot that wasn't filled yet, magically, as if this was fated to happen,
As if it
maybe.
was
So
Amy's.
yeah. And so November 17th, hopefully I can convince Amy to come on then. We'll just talk about that then. Is that Allison Chase will be our guest next week. Allison Chase is going to come on and talk about the whole logistics nightmare. And maybe she'll have some light to shed on, the downward trend we think we're seeing. Is it a downward trend? Is it real? What's going to happen in the future? All that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
come prepared with your questions for Allison next week about logistics, shipping, fulfillment, all that kind of stuff. Nicholas has a general comment. It's a big one.
I think he's right though.
Yeah. I think the local game scenes are already picking back up. I believe so too. We're like I'm on a couple, meetup type websites for my city and they're definitely picking up for local games. I just had a friend say, "Hey, we should get together and game this weekend." It's like, "Oh, this is like
That's
the
like a thing
first
again. Yeah.
request in like 2 years." Yeah. Of course we can do that. We can't because my son is coming back for reading week, but we will do that in 2 or 3 weeks. People are starting to get booster shots. Yep, after being vaccinated, so they are feeling braver about going in out in general. The organized play scene at my local FLGS, they're already back up in full swing. I stopped by during Friday Night Magic last week and it was packed, 100-ish people. Free
Mm.
RPG day at the same store probably had 50-ish people recently too. Yeah, that's a good sign that the world is
Well,
healing,
people are
right?
craving attention. You know what I mean? Like they're craving
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
interactions, right? And
and doing
um,
those things.
a lot of places are getting a lot safer. Like, Sen and I live in Ontario, right? And I think we passed the 80% vaccination rate. So now there's even talk that at least the CBC announced a couple weeks ago that they're thinking, I guess by March, we might actually be mask free. That's also after the next wave of boosters too, right?
Yeah. And I mean, so with the variants and all that kind of stuff, herd immunity, the percentage has actually kind of gone up, unfortunately. So we'll see what happens. But there you go. Adam, my questions are maybe more personal for another
That was him
time,
saying he'll ask us his own things later.
but happy to have heard the observations and predictions. Okay. You can ask us later in whatever way you wish.
I think that's what
Uh,
that meant.
Yeah, Adam also has a new synthesizer, so he might be focusing on that. It's like a cool mini modular, so it's a really neat synth that he bought. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? We are almost out of time anyway.
Mhm.
So let's just figure something out. So next week is Allison. The week after that will be Amy. We also have Mike from. I can never remember the title of his company. It's Mike Raftopoulos, and he's going to be coming in from Greece, and it'll be like 2 a.m. or something.
Oh,
But he's coming to
wow.
talk. He's a night hawk as well,
Okay.
like me. He's going to come in and talk about localization. He is one of the foremost agents in like Europe in the EU that
Yay, more
tries to get
markets. That's what we
yeah,
wanted to
tries to
talk
get your
to.
games into other markets. So if you are a small publisher, maybe come and talk to Mike. That's right. Nicholas said this is exactly. It's Meeple on board, Mob Vanguard. That's it. When I when I first saw that, it's like, who's that? And like, it's funny because Mike and I talk a lot, and Mike emailed me and said, or messaged me and said, "Oh, Mob Vanguard, that's Meeples on Bard." And he didn't tell me it was his company. I said, "Oh, oh, that sounds cool. What do they do? Oh, they do this." And you sound really knowledgeable on that. How come you know so much? Because it's my company. Oh, and I
Oh.
knew what he did. I just didn't know
Europe's
this
a
was
weird
them.
market though. It's like they
Yeah,
don't have like, if you look at North America and you find out where the majority of things are sold, people are like Walmart, Target, and like Amazon. But
yeah,
if you go to like Europe, that's actually not really true of where games are bought, at least not trending like the way they are here. They have so much more localized, smaller, like game specific
game shops.
stores
Yeah,
that, you need someone who understands how to get to those guys because they
yeah.
don't respond the same way to department stores. Honestly, Amazon is not what it is in Europe than, what it is here and things like that.
Right. I mean,
It's true.
and the same thing. Like, there's definitely WalMarts in different parts of the world. They're just not as uh
They're not your
um
go-to for games.
yeah, and they're not they're for anything almost in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. They haven't been as well received in a lot of other countries. Well, it's just like Target was not well received here in Canada.
Well, because they didn't stock their shelves. They were just dumb.
There's a whole reason for that. There's a whole other episode on that at some point. Um, After that, we will have Anya Combs here. Anya Combs is one of the people who is like her portfolio is gaming on Kickstarter. That's her whole portfolio. So I'm not sure exactly what her title is. She might be like a VP in charge of gaming.
Mm.
She's a big she's a big person there though. So It'll be very cool to have her on. Nicholas is just telling us that Mike Raftopoulos and Meeple's on board Mob Vanguard helped his company or his game, which is Adventure Tactics through Letterman Games, get licensed in China and Spain. And that's exactly how this happened. Was one of my publishers said, "Oh, we've been contacted by this company, Mob Vanguard. What do they do?" It's like, I don't know. Let's go find out. And then we have Sharang Biswa coming in December to talk about erotica in gaming. That'll be interesting. That'll be fun. And last but not least on our hit list, December 15th, Jay Bell. We're going to be highlighting his design efforts, and that'll be fun. And then we have 2 weeks in December, the 22nd and the 29th. We're not certain that we're going to be on live for that just because holidays. So we'll see.
We
We'll
didn't
see.
like formally book anybody.
We didn't book anybody, but if there's a demand, we'll book somebody. So,
Or maybe
hey, that takes us
we'll
right to the
have
60-minute mark.
Laura back and we can do an episode with her.
Uh, that may be true. We'll see.
I don't know.
That'll be fun. Cool. So come next week for Allison. Talk about logistics. And in the meantime, if you do have questions, because you didn't have any tonight for some weird reason, you can ask them to us on Twitter at Meeple Syrup. You can go to Facebook, go to the Meeple Syrup Shop Talk page, ask us there. We'll be more than happy. We're going to ask Shem to fill us
Oh,
in
yes.
there.
And post any of your sustainable or recyclable products, manufacturers, whatever it is, because I do think having, more information and more knowledge of that kind of stuff of what's out there is very helpful.
Right. If you want to chat with me personally, it's at Senfeng Lim on Twitter, where I'll be talking about Exquisite Corpse. An Exquisite Crime is the actual name. A lot over the next little while. We got 12 more days on the Kickstarter. We're fully funded, but we'd love to hit some stretch goals. So if you're interested in a drawing game where you populate a surreal world and you play psychic detectives solving surreal crimes, as an RPG, let me know. I can hook you up. Well, you can just back the Kickstarter.
Just back the Kickstarter.
That way. Just back the Kickstarter.
But
Erica, where can people
all about it first?
I can tell you all about it. Erica, where can people reach you?
So I'm at Erica Buyuris.
And what are you talking about lately?
I don't know. I'm trying to be better. I try to have at least a conversational post every day or two or something.
Yeah. I think it's good to get to chat out there with people. And if you want to help us keep the lights on here, thank you very much to all of our patrons who have done so, especially over the pandemic, when we're just building up a little bit of a nest egg to go out into the world and spread Meeple Syrup love and joy when we can.
We're still hoping to do more stuff at cons, including help people get there. So
yeah,
that is still the plan, but there was nowhere to go. So
right. Or nowhere. Well, it's more of a, can we do that during this time? I think is the real big question. But we'll figure it out, and we'll let you know what we're gonna do with some of those funds as we get them in. And when life kind of slows down for all of us, we'll figure out exactly what we're gonna make. We have to make something for this term, this season. In terms of an infographic. We'll get something.
We still want to get those infographics going.
Yeah, have a couple of ideas. Just got to get them done. All right, cool. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. Again, next week is Allison Chase. Come for that. And I will go post right now in the shop talk asking about sustainable manufacturers and goods and
or products.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Awareness is good.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll talk to you later. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you in a bit. Bye.
Bye.